Thank you for joining us for Robin Hood's first ever Mayoral Candidate Forum, a conversation on poverty and economic mobility. We are so grateful to have WNYC's Bridget Bergen and also the Gothamists, Elizabeth Kim, as our moderators. And today, we're going to be joined by 6 of the candidates currently running in the Democratic primary for mayor of New York City. Now, whoever leads this great city next faces the intimidating but critical task of fostering recovery and renewal for all of its residents. As our No City Limits conference and leading thinkers have explored these past 2 days, the COVID pandemic has fueled widespread unemployment, housing instability, hunger, and for many New Yorkers, these hardships existed long before this crisis even started. For many New Yorkers, the only thing that happened was these hardships were exposed and exacerbated. But despite the challenges, New Yorkers have been and will always be resilient. Throughout the pandemic, New Yorkers have persevered with grit, with strength, and with faith that a better future for New York City is possible. So today we're joined by some of these New Yorkers, voters, who will share their perspectives and also their questions for the candidates about how they will create a stronger and a more equitable city if they're elected the next mayor. So to all of you, thank you for accepting our invitation. We look forward to hearing your ideas, and thank you for getting into the arena. And so now, over to Bridget and Elizabeth, our moderators.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Robin Hood Robin Hood Foundation New York City Mayoral Forum at their No Limits convention. I'm Bridget Bergen, a politics reporter at WNYC and Gothamist. And before we begin, I just want to acknowledge today I was supposed to be joined by Errol Lewis, host at Spectrum New York 1. And unfortunately, Errol's father passed away. And if you have not yet read his tribute in the New York Daily News, I encourage you to do so. It is beautiful. And we share our deepest thoughts and sympathies with him today. But I am lucky enough to have my colleague from the elections team at WNYC and Gothamist, Elizabeth Kim, joining me this afternoon to co-moderate. And so I'm going to turn it over to Liz to introduce our candidates.
So let's bring in our candidates. First, we have Shaun Donovan. He served as the Secretary of U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and as the head of the Office of Management and Budget in the Obama administration. He was the commissioner for the city's Department of Housing, Preservation, and Development under Mayor Michael Bloomberg. Next up, Kathryn Garcia. She's worked in 2 mayoral administrations. She was the chief operating officer of Mayor Michael Bloomberg's Department of Environmental Protection before later running Bill de Blasio's Sanitation Department and briefly as the chair of the Public Housing Authority. Most recently, she served as the city's food security czar. Ray McGuire, who will be joining us later, is a lifelong financial services executive. He has spent time in senior positions at First Boston, Merrill Lynch, and Morgan Stanley, before most recently serving as the global co-head of investment banking at Citigroup. Scott Stringer is the New York City Controller, a post he's held since 2014. Prior to that, Mr. Stringer served as the Manhattan Borough President. He spent time as a tenant organizer, a legislative aide, and as a state assembly member representing the Upper West Side. And last but not least, Maya Wiley most recently served as the chair of the Civilian Complaint Review Board. She's worked as the top lawyer in Mayor Bill de Blasio's administration, in addition to time spent as a New School professor, legal analyst, and as a lawyer with the NAACP, ACLU, and the Department of Justice. Welcome to all of our candidates. I will now give it to Bridget, who will read you the ground rules of the forum.
Thanks, Liz. So I know our candidates know this already, but for our audience, we're going to be asking the candidates a series of questions on different topics. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer. We'll direct the question to each candidate, and then we'll ask a follow-up question, and they'll have about 30 seconds to respond to that. There will be our magical team in the tech room who will cut them off if they exceed their time by too much, but we'll gently nudge them if they're approaching the edge of that time. And then we'll have a cross-examination section where the candidates will be able to ask each other a question. We also have questions, as Wes Moore described, from some voters in our community. We'll get responses from the candidates to those questions and then also ask them some follow-ups to that. And so with all of that in place, let's go ahead and begin. Our first topic is education. The COVID-19 pandemic has widened the opportunity gap between students of color living in poverty and white higher income students. It's estimated that students of color living in poverty could have up to 1 year of unfinished learning by the end of this school year. How would your administration address this critical challenge? And we're going to start with Shaun Donovan.
Thanks so much for having us all here today. And as somebody who's worked with Robin Hood over many, many years in my career, thank you for everything you do to fight poverty in this city. First of all, what we need to do is ensure that we're helping those students recover. That means ensuring that we are finally getting broadband out into our communities. Just yesterday, I released the most far-reaching innovation and technology plan for the future of the city that would do that. It includes making sure our libraries are open 7 days a week, 24/7, because they become community hubs that are so important during this crisis as we reopen. But we need to go farther than that. I have an innovative proposal in my education plan that includes education recovery coordinators that would ensure that we're putting our young people to work side by side with our teachers, not only helping kids catch up academically, but also from the emotional and social trauma that they've been through this past year. That's just one of the many ways I would ensure that we're recovering.
Thank you so much. Next, Kathryn Garcia.
Thank you so much for having me, and to everything that Robin Hood does year in and year out. My plan on fulfilling our recovery on education is really about ensuring that we are prepared for a class of students that may have lost a whole year, not only for their education, but also for their mental health, which means we need to have counselors in the classrooms, but also ensure that we have enrichment, that we have art, and that we have music. You know, my son was in kindergarten after 9/11, and I was volunteering. Every child made pictures of buildings and airplanes, and it was therapeutic for them to go through that. We know that 1 in 1,000 kids may have lost a parent or guardian during the pandemic. We need to be prepared for that as we invest in ensuring that they are catching up to the standards of the 21st century economy.
And next we'll go to Scott Stringer.
Well, first of all, I want to also thank Robin Hood for this opportunity, and to all the work you've done, Wes. We were able to collaborate together, and you advised me on my NYC Under 3 plan, which is a way to triple the number of kids who could have childcare and affordable childcare for parents. And that is the centerpiece of how we're going to bring back our education system. But look, I have 2 kids skin in the game. I have a 3rd grader and a 2nd grader, and they're in public school. And they have suffered through this pandemic. And we do need to start planning now, not when we have a new mayor, but now, to build out a foundational plan for mental health initiatives to help our kids. Yes, a lot of kids lost their moms and their dads. They were frontline workers. There's been no closure. My kids lost their grandparent, and I still have trouble articulating how to help them. For step one, we do need a mental health initiative. Step two, I've audited the Department of Education. I've seen that bureaucracy. We've got to move bureaucracy money into classroom money.
Thank you. And Maya Wiley.
Well, I also am grateful to Robin Hood. We need partnership to solve poverty. And I am someone who went to a segregated Black elementary school and was 2 years behind grade level at the top of my class in the second grade. So look, it starts with this. We have to understand what has worked to catch kids up. We have solutions, some of which we never even talk about in the school system. Things like P-TECH, which is a high school model partnership with technology firms where kids, even kids who are behind grade level, are doing college level work. And it's lengthened high school to 6 years in order to get an associate's degree. That's innovation. The other thing is trauma-informed care is what I've put in my gun violence prevention platform so that we're putting trauma-informed care in schools where kids have high rates of gun violence, because the truth is that impacts educational outcomes. And the other is to recognize that the community school models are good working models. We underinvested in them. They got cut in the context of the last budget, but we need not just that school coordination, but the partnerships with community-based organizations that treats children as whole children, because that's how they not only catch up, they advance. And technology access is something I worked on.
Thank you so much. So as a follow-up to each of you, and we're going to go in the same order that we did in that first round of answers, nearly 1 in 4 Black and Latino New Yorkers lack access to a home computer or a tablet with internet access. By comparison, just under 1 in 8 white New Yorkers do not have access to a computer with internet. So how would you close the connectivity gap as part of your education policy?
Well, as I said earlier, I've just released a detailed plan to do exactly that, which I can't do justice to in 30 seconds. But I will say this. First of all, we need to be paying attention to the technology gaps. But when you really scratch under the surface in this, affordability of service is actually the primary barrier for so many New Yorkers. And so we need to be building partnerships to ensure that we're actually making the service affordable, and that we're providing other pathways to entry, like libraries, as I said before.
Kathryn?
Thank you. As I have said from the beginning of this campaign, broadband is clearly no longer a nice to have. It is an absolute requirement for the 21st century, both for education as well as for employment and to get a vaccine. And I have made proposals around this that have to do with ensuring that there's access, that we do make sure that there is affordability. But if a kid doesn't have a device, we in government need to ensure that they have one and they are prepared to do their studies at home or in the classroom.
Thanks. Comptroller Stringer?
Well, look, there is tens of thousands of kids who do not have access to broadband and their remote devices aren't working. And we have to address that inequity before it's too late. So first and foremost, and again, this is not necessarily a new mayor problem. This is a Bill de Blasio and Department of Education problem. I have said that we need to give an internet passport for parents who can't afford internet access. And we need an inventory and identify the 100,000 children we know do not have access to a remote learning device. It is a city-wide disgrace.
Thank you all. Over to you, Liz.
Do I get a...
Oh, I'm so sorry. I apologize.
It's okay, Bridget. I love you. So look, I, as a racial justice advocate, worked on digital divide issues in my career as an advocate. When I was in City Hall, I made government, created the revenue stream, and figured out how to get every single apartment in Queensbridge houses government-supported broadband, free broadband, so that there was a broadband safety net. And that was a program that I had identified public housing developments for in every single borough. I say that because it fell off when the leadership lost sight of it. I won't, because it's been my vocation and my passion, and I know how to get it done in city government because I was working on that, and I will build from that model and from others. And when I have more than 30 seconds, I'll tell you the rest.
Thank you all this time. Over to you, Liz.
So now we have some pre-recorded videos where New Yorkers are going to ask the question. The first one comes from Hattie Burns.
Hi, my name is Hattie. I am 37 years old. I am a mother of 3, 2 of whom are currently school age. We reside in the Bronx. My children commute every day outside of their borough to attend school. It roughly takes my children an hour and 20 minutes every day to get to school. We do it because quality education isn't readily available in our neighborhood. So my question to the 2020 mayoral candidates is, there is a real serious economic and social gap between children in New York City. What is your plan to bring quality education to every single New York City child, no matter what their social status is or where they live? Thank you.
Maya Wiley, would you like to take that question first?
Yes, I would, because my godson, who lived in Soundview houses in the Bronx, I had move with me for that very same reason. And this is how we solve it. First of all, we recognize there is a resource gap, and we have to put more resources into the classrooms in our schools, particularly our schools that have not had sufficient investment. We actually have to create student support teams, because we haven't done that. So many of our kids have a bunch of needs and supports that help them expand their educational opportunity. That's part of the community school model, ensuring that we have partnerships both with the private sector as well as for our not-for-profits that create that whole wraparound set of services, but also other educational opportunities. So part of the opportunity of COVID, we've already blown open the box. The box has been flattened. It is time we recognize that we can create new and innovative models, use vacancy as an opportunity for smaller class size, and ensure that we're engaging in creating a more diverse teacher pipeline so that we also have more teachers that look like our kids, because we know that that increases educational outcome.
Shaun Donovan?
Thank you. Look, we can predict not only the life chances, but the life expectancy of a child growing up in the city by their zip code. And that has to end. So it isn't just schools, it's making sure that every kid, every family in the city has within 15 minutes of their front door, not only a great public school, but everything they need to build a life of opportunity. That's my 15-minute neighborhood proposal. And it's what I would do as mayor to reorient the way we plan the city on education and everything else. Second, what I'd say is we have the seeds of solving this problem in New York City. There's nothing wrong with New York that can't be solved by what's right with New York. We have highly successful and highly integrated schools that work in this city, whether it's arts-based or STEM-based schools, whether it's dual language schools. I would expand the ones we have and create more of them all across this city to ensure that we actually solve the yawning gap in our education system.
And now Kathryn Garcia.
You know, this is unacceptable that we don't have great schools in every neighborhood. You know, I'm a child of the public school system, and our neighborhood school was the center of both our educational life, but also our social engagement. Those are where you made your friends, who your parents were. So that is why I've committed to ensuring that the resource gaps across the city are closed for all of our schools, that we are investing in enrichment programs for our elementary, but we need to start even before then. We need to start with 0 to 3. So there is real childcare for those who make under $70,000. That we are able to have to be prepared for coming into the school system, but also because that's around employment for women going forward. But I have a full program on my website that talks about we continue to invest in education because that is what makes so we will have the kids ready for the employment opportunities of the 21st century. Sorry, I was a little
And finally, Scott Stringer.
Look, we have to.
Yes.
Actually, you are live.
You are live.
It's all live.
Yeah, we could hear you guys.
Let me know when you want me to let it rip.
You got to give him his time back too.
Thank you,
Kathryn may get her time back too, because Kathryn couldn't hear you, Kathryn.
Yeah.
We need Kathryn's voice as well.
Sorry about that, candidates.
Happens.
Hazards of
I
Zoom.
call it the COVID verse.
Why don't we give Kathryn a chance to answer that question one more time? Go ahead, Kathryn.
Yeah, thank you, and Maya, thank you for advocating on my behalf. As I said, that having any child go to a school that is subpar is unacceptable. We don't allow other city services to be unevenly distributed in this city. And I know that when I went to school, it was the center of our neighborhood and everyone went to the same school and got a great education. When I am mayor, I'll start at 0 to 3 and ensure that for those who make under $70,000, that those children are prepared for school and that it allows their parents, particularly the mothers who are head of households in many cases, to go back to work. But we need to do early literacy in every school so that kids are ready to read. And I would encourage everyone to go to my website because I have an even longer program that talks about how we get kids to the point where they have careers and are ready for the 21st century jobs.
Okay, lastly, Scott.
Well, I have plans to address the education disparities in our city. And growing uptown in Washington Heights, we always knew we were going to go to the neighborhood schools, and then we were going to go to the Y and hang out, and that's what so many kids did. And right now, we have to be specific about how we're going to end disparities. Step one is my child care program, NYC Under 3. That's going to combat inequity at the start. I have legislation pending in Albany with Senator Jessica Ramos to raise the necessary money to invest in tripling the number of child care slots for the parents who struggle the most economically. But we also have to create the largest teacher residency program because right now 40% of our teachers leave after 5 years, and we need to equip teachers with the skills to not just support every child, but give them financial assistance and training so this can become the career that they want to stay in for a lifetime. We have seen during the COVID pandemic how critical teachers are, but we also have to recognize that we can't have two standards of education. We can't have admission standards at Stuyvesant that exclude Black and brown children, and I would repeal Heck Calandra. I'd make our admission system fairer by using the 7th grade test scores, and I would also stop testing 4-year-olds for GNT. These are the kind of implementations that we could do on day one, and we have to be ready on day one to meet this challenge. We also, for older kids and graduates, we have to think about how we create economic opportunities in terms of micro-credentialing for the jobs of tomorrow post-pandemic.
Thank you, Scott. You actually anticipated my follow-up. So here's the follow-up. New York City has one of the most segregated school systems in the country, and one of the frequently cited reasons has been the use of screens in middle schools and GNT programs. Would you keep this system in place? You have 30 seconds each. Let's start with Maya.
So I co-chaired the school diversity advisory group that came up with 2 separate reports and literally 200 pages of recommendations. I stand by that report. We have to eliminate discriminatory admissions policies and practices, and we have to allow more innovation and meet our goals. We set them in that report. I stand by them.
Shaun?
Thanks so much. Well, first we have to recognize that segregation begins at home, and we need a mayor who will aggressively ensure that we're creating more integration and equality in our neighborhoods. I did that as housing secretary, leading the way to give real meaning to the Fair Housing Act of 1968. And if you look at my education platform, which the New York Times called the most detailed on this issue and everything else in education, we need to make sure that we're not just getting rid of those screens, but actually encouraging more schools that are highly integrated and successful, as I said earlier, and ensuring that we're bringing more teachers that look like our communities into our schools.
Just to clarify, though, you are in favor of eliminating the screens?
I would eliminate the middle school screens. I would eliminate certain other screens like time and attendance that have been shown to not improve performance and are clearly discriminatory.
Okay, thank you. Kathryn.
Thank you. I think that this is one of the most important issues confronting our city. I certainly wouldn't give a 4-year-old a test to put them in G&T. I do believe that every elementary school needs to have enrichment, though, so that children can engage on all different levels. At middle school, I would eliminate screens in the way that District 15 did, with parents in partnership moving forward. And as I've said in my platform, at the high school level, I would expand high schools and use this Texas model, which takes the top 5%, 10% of all middle school graduates by grade point average and open up seats for them.
And finally, Scott.
I think I answered the question, but just to reiterate, I do think we have to specifically say it and address the disparity in our specialized schools. We want to reward excellence, but we have to allow for Black and brown kids to have access to those schools. This test doesn't do that, so we can't keep the test. But we also have to look at how we're going to end geographic screens for high schools. We have to rethink how we're going to include kids in GNT and end the disparities there. Look, I'm about to expire.
Thank you. We're now going to move on to our next topic, but first I want to welcome Ray McGuire.
Thank you. Thank you for welcoming me. Thank you for having me. And hello to the other panelists.
Hey, Ray.
So our next topic is going to be on housing and homelessness. Harvard University researcher Raj Chetty has shown how important it is for a person to grow up in a high opportunity or low poverty neighborhood if they are going to achieve the American dream. What would your administration prioritize to ensure all New York City children are growing up in high opportunity neighborhoods? And I'd like Ray to answer the first question.
Your question is what opportunities, just restate the question, I'm sorry.
What would your administration prioritize to ensure that all New York City children are growing up in high opportunity neighborhoods?
You know, that today, it's clear that we don't have the opportunity for all too many New Yorkers. We have, 25,000+ families that are homeless. So we need first to begin to prevent that homelessness. We need to make certain that we have and extend the moratorium on eviction notices. We need to make certain that we give rent subsidies. We also need to make certain that we have support services today, which are sorely lacking. And we need to make sure that we repair the existing homes in which many of these children live. So we need to repair that. And for the people who are in the homeless situation, those kids, we need to transition them to homes, get them out of the shelters. And those who are in homes, we need to give them vouchers to keep them in homes. And we also need to build a truly deeply affordable housing stock today, which we haven't built. And we need to make sure that you talked about children, but we need to also talk about the seniors. And we need to make sure that we can transition people into home ownership. And that's the plan that I would have to make sure that each of these children has the same opportunities that I had, beginning with nothing.
Thank you. Maya Wiley?
So again, this has been my career for 30 years, including founding an organization whose mission was to dismantle structural racism, and opportunity housing was a big part of what we talked about. So one, it starts with recognizing we need affordable housing, and truly affordable housing in every single community. That creates the ability for folks to choose where they live so they can have more opportunity-rich neighborhoods. But secondly, we have to invest in communities of color, and we've got to name it. I've got a plan to spend $10 billion in capital construction. That just means build things, fix things, but targeting creating 100,000 new jobs, good jobs. And we will do local targeted hiring in communities that are hard hit by COVID, Black and Latino and Asian communities. And we'll do it in a way that also brings more opportunity in the form of community care centers, drop-off centers with high quality services, both for childcare and elder care. Women have lost a decade in this pandemic, but also in particular women of color. And that's just a start.
Shaun Donovan, what would your priorities be to make this happen?
Well, I'm so glad you began with focusing on Raj Jetty's path-breaking work. And I work closely with Raj. In fact, I sit on his advisory board, and I've been a national leader on this issue in many ways. It's what's behind my 15-minute neighborhood proposal that I talked about earlier, that we restructure the way we plan in our city to ensure every child has that opportunity. I announced my campaign at Villa Verde in the South Bronx, the most sustainable housing development in the city. And not only does it have beautiful, truly affordable housing, it has a health clinic on the ground floor. It has playgrounds and gyms and stairways that are laid out so people actually use them. It has vegetables and fruit trees growing on the roofs so that kids pick those in the evening and eat them for dinner at night. And those are the kinds of opportunities we need to bring to every neighborhood that will really begin to fundamentally remake opportunity in this city.
Thank you. Kathryn Garcia?
Thank you. We know that housing heals, and we also know that healthy neighborhoods are diverse neighborhoods, particularly economically. You know, that being in a neighborhood with the financier and the butler and the teacher makes it so that kids grow up with more opportunity. And so we need to ensure that we are putting our affordable housing in neighborhoods that are rich in transit and rich in opportunity and have really strong schools, which is why I've supported the Soho NoHo rezoning effort. We need to ensure that we continue to make the investments that have to be made at NYCHA, because no child should be living in an apartment with lead or with mold, because we know that we need to have their health protected. We know that we're going to need to continue to build more, which is why I've said that I'm committed to building 50,000 units of deeply affordable housing across the city.
Scott Stringer.
Well, I do agree. First and foremost is a real affordable housing plan. This mayoral administration actually built affordable housing because they partnered with luxury developers, and that housing did not reflect the AMI or the actual need in communities. I issued a very far-reaching, encompassing plan, as you know all too well, today, and I think it hits a number of buckets: home ownership, NYCHA, but also accessing vacant property. That's step one. Step two is something that I think we have to own up to, and that is we as a city have an obligation to create wealth in our communities. And by not investing with women and minority-owned businesses over the last 7 years, has been a setback for so many neighborhoods. And I have fought that. I appointed the city's first chief diversity officer. I challenged Bill de Blasio and said, you cannot spend $23 billion on procurement and only have city contracts for 5% of the women and minority-owned business. That has to change.
Thank you, candidates. Oh, sorry, Bridget, I talked over you. I'm turning it over to Bridget.
Oh, I feel so much sympathy for you all in this virtual world now. So we're going to have another question from a voter on the same topic. It's Mallory Morrison. Let's hear that question.
Hi, my name is Mallory Morrison, and I'm from Queens, New York. My question I would like to present is, how will New York provide assistance for the daunting task of the homeless to find housing resources, and to make sure that the program or organization that provides this help is free of stereotypes and generalizations that result in discrimination for the people that are experiencing homelessness and mental illnesses?
And we're going to start with Kathryn Garcia.
We need to open up our.
Start from the beginning. You were muted. Go ahead.
We have been in a time of crisis. We need to open up our economy because honestly, nothing is affordable if you don't have a job. And we know particularly for women heads of households that they have lost more employment than anyone else in this economy. We've got to get that back on track. But as you think about what the city can do to prevent this loss of housing and to make it so that families get out of the hotels where we spend $400 million, we need the voucher to actually meet the market. So that when you are using a voucher, you're not with a rent that maybe you could have gotten in 1965, but you certainly can't get now. And so also, we have to ensure we are using all of our laws to protect people from discrimination about where the money is coming from. A landlord should not care whether or not you're bringing cash, a check, or a voucher.
Thank you. Comptroller Stringer.
Look, I think that we have to align our housing policy and our homeless policy. Over the last 7 years, we went from spending $1.6 billion in managing the homeless crisis to $3.2 billion, but we didn't build the actual low-income housing that we needed. That's why I've identified 3,000 vacant lots in this city that can be used to build 40,000 low-income housing units so that people can move from homelessness into permanent housing. And then we also have to think about the kind of housing we're going to need, 20,000 single adults that are going to need help. We have more people going into homeless shelters because of domestic violence, 41%, as opposed to 27% for evictions. That's pretty startling. We don't have enough domestic violence beds, and when we do, there's a short stay rate. It's absolutely a dangerous situation. So in order for us to fundamentally transform homelessness, we're going to have a transformational housing policy.
Next, we'll hear from Shaun Donovan.
Thanks so much. And my career in public service began more than 30 years ago when I volunteered in a homeless shelter in college. I went to work for the National Coalition for the Homeless. And I'm proud that I led the strategy for President Obama that dramatically reduced street and family homelessness around this country. In fact, in 80 cities and states, we ended veteran homelessness, not reduced it, but ended it. How did we do that? Because we understood, unlike Mayor de Blasio, that you can't solve homelessness with just homeless programs. This is not just a problem of a shelter for someone to sleep in. It is a problem of mental health. It is a problem of substance abuse and criminal justice. We can only reimagine our right to housing as a right to shelter, a right to housing, if we truly remake our system, integrate all of these pieces together, and solve these problems together. That's what I did as housing secretary. That's what I could do as mayor.
Ray McGuire.
Hi, listen, this is a fundamental issue in this city and around the country, but especially in this city as it has grown as a result of COVID and all the systemic inequities that we have experienced for far too long. One, we can no longer be a warehousing system for the homeless. What do we have to do? We have to prevent homelessness. We have to make certain that as this moratorium for evictions lapses, that we have something that can transition. We need to make certain that we have a place of transition to formerly incarcerated. We need to make certain that we extend rent subsidies. Number two, support services. In many of the places in which we have the homeless, we don't have broadband. So the families that are homeless have not been able to participate in education. So we need to address that. We need to make certain that we have transition childcare services. Number three, we need to make certain that we accelerate transition from the shelters to homes and build truly deeply affordable homes, which is something that others have spoken about, but nothing's gotten done on any watch from any of the prior administrations.
And Maya Wiley.
You know, I spent a lot of time up at the Lucerne with Shams DeBaron, the homeless hero, and the other men of the Lucerne. And let me just say, what he and so many others have made clear, which is, first of all, I mean, housing is a human right, and we should be housing first. Every single person is housing ready. And what that means is, right, instead, we should take the 100 shuttered hotels that are not going to reopen and see them as supportive housing for folks who are on the streets or afraid to go into congregate shelters, so that there are support services, mental health, rehabilitation for drug addictions in place, because that's what helps keep people not just housed, but also gives them the ability to even get jobs, hold them down. And what we saw with the Lucerne was also a model around the partnerships, because one of the things we need is to have open conversations with community. And so many of those neighbors said this is what brought community to their neighborhoods.
Thank you all. I'm going to turn it over to Liz for our next community question.
So we're moving on to another topic. It's on higher education. And this question comes from Rachel Jerome.
Hello, my name is Rachel Jerome and I am from Queens, New York. The City University of New York is known for being the go-to public university system for low-income New Yorkers to receive a low-cost, high-quality education. The New York Times even stated that Cuny propels almost 6 times as many low-income students into the middle class and beyond. As mayor, how would you ensure that Cuny continues to succeed in pursuing its mission of providing students with a quality and accessible college education, regardless of backgrounds or means? Thank you.
Shaun Donovan, you get to tackle that question first.
Well, first, we've got to make an education affordable at Cuny. Cuny is one of the jewels of our public education system in this country. And just as I did as budget director for President Obama, when we built a free community college proposal into our budget, I would do the same as mayor to ensure that everyone there would be able to get an affordable education. But second, we've got to better connect Cuny into jobs. That's why I've proposed that we create a Center for the Future of Work at Cuny, and why I've proposed the New York City Job Corps, which would be the biggest training and apprenticeship program that the city has ever seen. We are ensuring that we're bringing private sector partners to the table and building a real pipeline from the very beginning of our education system, from the cradle right to careers. We need to be doing that. And we can do it because Cuny is the most successful model in the country of creating economic mobility.
Thank you. Kathryn Garcia, what would you do with Cuny?
You know, I completely agree that Cuny is a jewel, and the city has not embraced it as a government in the way that it should have, and integrated it into all the different aspects of city life. We know that we need to make intentional connections into the private sector, that we need to guarantee every Cuny student a paid internship and a good first job. We know that many students are suffering from food insecurity or for housing insecurity, and that is where I would ensure that we are making it so that they can be successful in their Cuny career. I was actually having a conversation recently with a professor at Baruch who teaches fledgling accountants, but tries to embed in them a real love of nature. That is the type of holistic education we need to see out of Cuny, but also ensure that we are preparing them for those jobs of the 21st century.
Maya Wiley.
Well, you know, we had a People's Assembly explicitly with the Student Senate of Cuny. And it was critically important because the students created a plan and asked explicitly for our support. And look, we've already embedded in our $10 billion New Deal for New York plan that will also include making sure we're investing in CUNY's physical facilities, because that is a part of the quality of the educational experience, but also that we're aligning our workforce development dollars and programs to ensure that we're helping students as well. But look, a critical part of this is ensuring that we're also fighting the fight with both the federal government and with the state around resources that go into keeping and making making college free and affordable. But also say one other thing, because having worked in higher education, having been a senior vice president for social justice at the New School, I can tell you one of the greatest drivers of tuition going up is healthcare costs. And we're working on a plan to use the city's power to bring those costs down. That will help CUNY as well.
Scott?
Look, when I was Manhattan Borough President for 8 years, nothing brought me more joy in working with students, faculty, and the CUNY presidents in funding much needed capital investments into CUNY and coming up with a comprehensive plan. And the CUNY rebuilding was very critical. But we have to double down not just on infrastructure, but we have to double down on the humanity of CUNY. It's the aspirational place where new immigrants and kids from the neighborhoods get to go to CUNY. And this is an opportunity in the post-pandemic world to make CUNY Community College free. It's $160 million, and there's a whole lot of waste in this city budget. And then we could create a real robust workforce development plan. We need to upskill our workforce in the post-pandemic. The way to do that is to use micro-credentialing and other paths where you don't even need a 2-year degree to get into telehealth and IT and communications. This has to be the goal, and CUNY could be the centerpiece of that.
Thank you. And finally, Ray McGuire.
Thank you. I'm actually flattered to hear some of the ideas that I spoke about early in my campaign being discussed here, being described here by others. CUNY is the asset of the future, as it has been for so many in the past. We have to invest in CUNY. Education is the way that I got here, from the other side of the tracks, in the support of my mother, going to the educational institutions that gave me the foundations that I could go and compete. And to be here with you, we need to invest in CUNY. We need to make sure that we support some of the best educators that exist anywhere on the planet. And yes, it's important to make sure that the physical infrastructure is there, but we also need to understand the assets that exist in CUNY, the assets of the future. This can be the epicenter of technology going forward. I look at what CUNY has produced. I look at the talent at CUNY. I look at what CUNY can be going forward. And my priority would be to invest in CUNY to make sure that we have the best of the best so that we can train the best and so that they would have the future that each of us aspire to have.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Bridget now.
I do have to leave in about 2 minutes.
Well, we'll try to jump right into this. This is the exciting section that everyone's been waiting for, the cross-examination. My understanding is the candidates have been told who they're asking a question of, but you may not know who is asking you a question. So we'll start with you, Kathryn Garcia, who will be asking a question of Maya Wiley.
Maya.
Kathryn.
So what is the one program or policy from the current administration that you think was not effective that you would end? And what would you replace it with?
Well, let's just talk about the failure to have sufficient police oversight, complete failure. We saw that this summer. I'll put the public back in public safety, ensure that we have a police commissioner who is on mission to protect the public, including from police officers who decide to off-road when it comes to the rules of the road. And we'll make sure that the rules of the road are clear and that we will right-size the department, ensure that it is focused on what policing is appropriate for, but not focused on things that it is not appropriate for. So forget the mental health distress calls. We need a mental health crisis management team for that. Forget cops instead of counselors in our schools. What we need is student support teams. And forget having a badge and a gun at routine traffic stops, which we have seen result in the death of our residents. We need people who can just manage the situation. Rarely does that ever require anybody with a gun. And then focus it so we know that there's accountability, and I'll make sure that happens.
Next, we'll go to Scott Stringer, who's asking a question of Kathryn Garcia.
Kathryn, what would be the three things the city's food security programs, what are the three things, rather, the city's food security programs aren't doing that you think they should?
Yes, no, when I stepped in to make sure nobody went hungry, there are real silos in food. It's in schools, it's in senior centers, and it's in emergency food banks. Our infrastructure is not evenly distributed across the city. There aren't food banks and food pantries in every part of our city. That needs to change. There aren't farmers markets in every part of our city. That needs to change. There had not, prior to the delivery program, been easy access, regardless of your documentation status, to be able to get food. We also need to ensure that everyone who is eligible gets SNAP. We leave hundreds of millions of dollars on the table that would allow people to have independent choice to buy the food that they need and to make sure that it is culturally competent. Those are just a few things that I learned when I was responsible for food.
And before we go on to our next set of questions, we know that you need to leave, Kathryn. So if you want to give your closing remarks, and then we'll jump back into the cross-examination.
I want to thank everyone on the panel, and thank you to our moderators and to Robin Hood. I'm running for New York City mayor because I'm ready to lead the best city to a brighter tomorrow. I know how to get it done. The job of the mayor is to get up early, work hard, and battle through the bureaucracy, because you need to deliver for every person in the city of New York. That is why we need to open up our economy and promote economic opportunity and mobility. That is why we need to get our fundamental city services right, whether or not that is getting kids back into school buildings or keeping people safe in their communities. Those are critical underpinnings of how we open up our economy. And I know that I am the person to get this done, because I have done it before, over and over again, in every crisis in the city of New York, whether or not that was Hurricane Sandy or COVID. I've been asked to step up, and I have.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Take care, Kathryn.
See you soon.
And we'll return. We'll return to our cross-examination with Ray McGuire asking a question of Shaun Donovan.
Shaun, you were part of the Bloomberg administration and its horrible stop and frisk policies, which have caused irreparable damage on Black and brown communities across New York City. The mayor has apologized. You said that you spoke out against this policy, but what specific action did you take, and what policy did you implement when you had the power to end this racist tactic?
Well, obviously I was housing commissioner and so didn't oversee that policy. But what I am very proud of is that both in the Bloomberg administration as well as in the Obama administration, I took a leadership role on breaking the cycle of incarceration. Very specifically, I started a pilot when I was housing commissioner that gave housing vouchers to folks coming out of Rikers. And the results were remarkable. A year later, 95% of those folks were stably housed, getting back to jobs, and hadn't reoffended. It was so successful that that pilot has been replicated in 40 different cities across the country. I'm also proud that as housing secretary and budget director, I ended the practice of giving surplus military equipment to police forces around the country. I ended the practice of 3 strikes in public housing that stopped those who had been criminally justice involved. from getting housing. And I also led the strategy that ended Ban the Box so that we could help people getting out of incarceration actually get jobs.
Thank you. And so, Shaun, we'll turn it over to you to ask a question of Scott Stringer.
Scott, I saw that you just announced the ability for the pension funds to invest in riskier products like private equity. And given my experience having to undo the damage of the mortgage crisis, watching those risky kind of investments devastate the savings of families in their homes, I'm concerned about this step. And I wanted to ask you to explain why you would allow that when it's putting savings of our city workers at risk.
I think you misread the article, so let me explain it to you. As you may recall, as controller, I've taken the harshest position possible on private equity firms that get in trouble, pay a settlement, and then attempt to pass it on to the rest of us. And I'm the only control in the country that has a zero tolerance policy on that. And I make them pay if they're guilty. What you saw was a memo, a due diligence memo, because I work with union trustees to make sure that this policy continues to make us competitive in the market. I have not changed my position, but part of what's made me a successful controller and will make me successful as mayor is collaboration and due diligence. That's how I was able to divest from fossil fuel, $4 billion. That's why I'm the only controller treasurer that divested from the private prison industrial complex. That's why they asked me to go to the White House and to Washington to work with cabinet secretaries on my proposals for more inclusivity in corporate boards and in the federal government. In fact, you were not at that meeting, so you were obviously not invited, or you didn't come. And you should have been there because they asked me to come in and try to show my policies and work with the Obama administration. So I have Obama connections.
Thanks to you both. And now, Maya Wiley, well, you can ask a question of Ray McGuire, please.
Hi, Ray.
Hi, Maya.
So listen, you have a plan to spend $1 billion direct payments to workers and small businesses, as I understand it, which I find commendable. That's why I'm proud to be supported by Local 1199. We share that care for those folks. How are you going to pay for it given the budget crisis? That's expense side spending, it sounds to me, and I know we face a big hole. So what's your plan?
Yeah, that is a great question, sir. Let me be specific. Let me actually identify the question which you're intending to ask me. It is part of my greatest, most inclusive economic comeback in this city's history, most inclusive, which includes the creation of 500,000 jobs, half of which are going to be with small businesses. And what I've outlined is 50,000 small businesses. And remember, small businesses are at the core of the city. They represent 50% of the employee base in the city. So 50,000 small businesses subsidizing 50% of their wages, so that not the handout that others have been describing, but 50% of their wages so they can stay working and so that they can be eligible, continue to be eligible for earned income tax credits. And so I look across the budgets, and thank you for acknowledging that I've managed more budgets than probably anybody here, at least 50 budgets in my time of leading a pretty large global business. So manage budgets that bigger than most state budgets, and recognizing what it requires to manage a budget. We have capacity both in the existing budget that is unspent and many of the state capacity that also. The number that you should focus on is about $975 million to be exact.
I didn't hear where the money comes from, though. So are you going to do tax increases, support tax increases from the state?
No, we don't need tax increases. The dollars are already eligible. No, I'm not advocating at this point. And the thing that people should be careful about is you can't look at the budget you got to look at it line by line. So I'm not requiring taxes. There's capacity, just as you've evidenced. There's $10 billion with capacity that you have. It's not clear where that's coming from. I'm talking about
I'm going to jump in here. I apologize. I apologize to cut you off, but respectful of the time and knowing that you're going to be doing this again in a little while. We'll keep this moving.
I got to run. I stayed as long as I could. I just want to say thank you to everybody and to my colleagues.
See you, Scott.
Okay, thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Thanks. See you.
Thanks
See you in a
for coming.
few. Thank you. Thank you both, our great reporters.
I will also have to go in a minute, but I don't want to interrupt the flow, please. I think Ray, it's probably Ray's turn. So if I disappear, you'll know why. I apologize.
My turn has already been taken.
Yeah, we've gone through, we've done our whole series of cross-examinations, which was great and makes me very excited for the debate. But since you will have to depart soon, Maya, why don't you give us your closing remarks?
Well, thank you. Well, one, it's been a pleasure to be here. It was great to be here with my colleagues. I'm running for mayor because I'm not a politician. I am just a person who comes from a community with 30 years of work as a change maker, as a racial justice advocate and activist, but who has also been the only candidate that has served inside City Hall and in senior leadership positions of city government, who has gotten city government to do things it has never done before, including broadband access. And I'm running because this has to be a city for all of us where we can all live with dignity, and we can get that done. And I look forward to working with you all to do just that as your next mayor.
Thanks so much, Maya.
You be well.
Take care, Maya.
And I'm going to turn it back over to Liz to introduce our next question.
So we're going to move on to a different topic, and it's going to be a recorded question from a New Yorker named Emmanuel Pardilla.
Hi everyone, my name is Emmanuel, and I'm a recent graduate from the Cuny School of Labor and Urban Studies. Having grown up in NYCHA in the Ma Haven, South Bronx area to a single mother who immigrated here from the Dominican Republic allowed us to become familiar with the meaning of hardship in order to embrace sacrifice. And as much as we sacrifice, it has become harder for people like myself to become independent and live sustainably independent with the prospects of building a family, having an affordable home, and truly embodying the notion of the American dream. It's more evident than ever that my generation is the generation that out of economic constraint will have to rely on sublet housing and contingent work. How do you plan to alleviate and bring solutions to these issues?
Shaun, what do you have to say to Emmanuel?
Well, Emmanuel, what I would say is that's what I've spent my lifetime trying to do, is to build opportunity through housing. And I want to speak very specifically about the experience I had at the very beginning of my career, where I worked with Bishop Johnny Ray Youngblood, remarkable leaders in East Brooklyn congregations and South Bronx churches, creating a pathway to home ownership and to wealth building. I helped create over 5,000 Nehemiah homes across this city, 90% of which were bought by families who were moving directly out of public housing. And that not only changed their lives, it changed their trajectory of their families and their grandkids. I would do that by making homeownership again a key part of our housing policy in the city, but I'd also go further with my equity bonds proposal. It would provide $1,000 to every kid born in this city and up to $2,000 a year each year, depending on income. That means a child born into poverty in New York will graduate with almost $50,000 to put to work buying a home, starting a business, paying for college. It would transform opportunity in this city.
Thank you. And now we'll have Ray McGuire answer that question.
Emmanuel, I am you. You are me. I was raised by a single mother on the other side of the tracks, and so I know what it's like when my mother has to decide whether or not she's going to pay the gas and light bill or put food on the table or pay the rent or pay tithes and offering in the church. I know what it's like to wash tin foil. I know what it's like when you have to put those small ends of bars of soap together to convince yourself that you have a full bar of soap. And the reason I'm running, Emmanuel, is to make certain that you have the opportunities and that your mother has the opportunities, that you have the opportunity to take care of your mother, that you have the opportunity to live in a home, that you can afford a home, that we build deeply affordable housing so that you don't have to pay 50, 60% of your income in rent. I know what it's like. And therefore, I'm committed to making certain that you have the opportunity. You are in college. I want to make certain that you can stay there and make certain that you have the opportunity to get the exposure and get the training and to have a job so that you can move forward. So the reason that I've taken on the journey here is to make certain that you, Emmanuel, can have the opportunities, and all the people who look like you have those opportunities.
And now I'm going to turn it over to Bridget.
So we are going to change topics again. This next question comes from another voter. It's on the topic of policing, and the video is from Fran Mevs.
Hello, I'm Francesca Mevs from Brooklyn. The pandemic and Black Lives Matter protests have highlighted the realities of over-policing in low-income neighborhoods and communities of color. What will you do as mayor to combat this systemic issue?
And we'll start with Ray McGuire.
So listen, I've just issued my safety and justice plan. Shootings are up almost 97%. Murders are up 45 to 50%. There has been a breach in the trust between law enforcement and the people. And my plan is designed to make certain that there's accountability. And what I call it is respect, accountability, and proportionality. The way we're going to start on the respect part is to hold those people who are the serial abusers for whom we pay $200 million a year. We need to hold them accountable. I will appoint a deputy mayor for public safety. I will also make certain that the chain of command is held accountable. I'm also going to make certain that we empower for investigative authority, the CCRB, so that rather than take 48 days to get camera footage, it's going to take 48 hours. I'm also going to make sure that we go in and restore community policing. It worked when it worked. We can begin to reestablish that relationship. So respect, accountability, and proportionality. And what do I mean by proportionality? It has often been said that if the only thing that you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When it comes to Black and brown communities, it's a sledgehammer. And my plan intends to address just that. Restoring respect, making accountability, starting with me, and making certain the responses that we have are proportionate. Safety and justice that you can look at rayformayor.com, which outlines my approach to how we return respect to this community.
Thank you. And Shaun Donovan.
Thank you. And I want to agree with Ray that I think there are many things we can do to create real accountability, to reform policing so that we create both safety and respect. I learned that as part of the 21st Century Policing Task Force under President Obama that I talked about earlier, working with mayors around the country to create exactly that kind of reform. But I also think we need to do two other things. We need to reduce the role of police in our communities and focus them on guns and violent crime, the things that our communities are concerned about. That means stopping criminalizing homelessness, replacing our system with an alternative 911 that sends trained healthcare and mental health professionals to the vast majority of instances that are not violent. And we need to do that as well in our schools. But we have to go farther. We have to go beyond policing to our correction system as well. Today, we spend over $400,000 per prisoner per year at Rikers, and we get bad results. We had to reinvest in communities, just as I did as housing commissioner, to give housing opportunities, but also job training and others. We could do that and break the cycle of incarceration.
Thank you both. And at this point, we're going to move into our closing statements from each of you. We want to thank all the candidates who appeared today, Scott Stringer, Maya Wiley, Kathryn Garcia, and offer each of you an opportunity to give us your closing statements. Shaun Donovan, let's start with you.
Thank you all for joining today. And again, thank you for your incredible work over the years that I've been proud to partner with you on. As you heard, I became a public servant because I grew up in a different time of crisis in this city. I saw homelessness exploding. I saw communities like the South Bronx and Central Brooklyn literally burning to the ground. And it lit a fire in me to go to work on behalf of this city that I love. That led to a 30-year career on the front lines of housing and homelessness, racial and economic justice, where I learned what it means to lead through crisis. I was housing commissioner in this city in the wake of 9/11. I became housing secretary in the midst of the worst housing crisis of our lifetimes. When Sandy hit our shores, President Obama asked me to lead the entire federal recovery effort. And then he asked me to lead the $4 trillion federal budget. And 3 weeks later, Ebola hit. And I was side by side with Dr. Fauci, our military leaders, all of the leaders across government, making sure an emerging global health threat didn't become a pandemic that cost tens of thousands of New Yorkers their lives. I know that in every one of those crises, those who are most vulnerable before the crisis are hurt the worst. That's why I was outraged but not surprised that COVID has disproportionately devastated communities of color. As mayor, I could not only repair and rebuild this city, but reimagine it in this time of crisis as a city that works for everyone. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you so much, Shaun. We know you have many of these on your agenda, so thank you for your time today. And let's go to Ray McGuire for your closing statement.
Thank you, Robin Hood. I have experienced Robin Hood and the effectiveness of Robin Hood for years, and to the leadership of Robin Hood, I have so much respect and admiration. On October the 15th, I called my then 94, now 95-year-old mother and said, "Mom, I quit my job." She said, "Boy, I think you have lost your mind." She said, "I thought you had a good job." I said, "Yeah, Mama, I did have a good job, but I think about all the sacrifices that you made for me when I was coming up on the other side of the track, and the fact that you gave me the opportunity to go and have an education, and with that education, come to New York almost 4 decades ago and get into an industry where there was nobody who looked like me, and perform in that industry for 36 years. And while I performed, while I was a soul brother, S-O-U-L, I made certain I was not the soul, S-O-L-E brother. And I said, "Mama, you know, I take my lived experiences and I take what I've been able to do in business, managing budgets through the course of the economic crisis. I didn't get termed out. I haven't served in administration, and I'm not looking for a promotion. I'm looking to lead this city forward because what New Yorkers want is something different." And so I take those experiences and I say, I'm going to lead this city into the greatest, most inclusive comeback in the history of New York City. And if there's anybody who can bring this city together and who can lead it forward, making certain that all of us, all New Yorkers, especially those who look like me and Emmanuel, get to participate going forward, then that's the mission on which I am now. And that's why I ask for your support at rayformayor.com. It ain't about me. This is about we. Ain't no plan B, ain't no Calvary. We don't get it done now, the course of history, we won't be on the right course of history. And now is the time, New York, for us to stand up and fight and lead and move forward so that our best days are ahead of us and not behind. rayformayor.com.
Thank you so much, Ray. And I want to thank everyone from the Robin Hood Foundation for organizing today's forum, for our technical staff, and to my colleague, Elizabeth Kim. It's been our pleasure to listen to all your ideas. We'll be listening and hoping to ask you more questions, hold you accountable until that primary on June 22nd. Thank you so much for being here, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Robin Hood.
Thanks, Bridget. Thanks, Elizabeth. Take care. Thank you, Robin Hood.
To close our conference, please welcome back one final time, Robin Hood Foundation CEO, Wes Moore.
This has been such an incredible 2 days. On behalf of everyone at the Robin Hood Foundation, thank you for your presence, for your time, and for your participation. We hope you'll join us again next year when Robin Hood will be here, following data, building partnerships, creating collective action, driving toward impact. So until then, I'll see you in the fight for progress and opportunity. Thank you.